Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. And today we are joined by one of our country's most insightful and incisive political analysts, Mighti Jamie. At last.
Yeah, it's been a while. We've been trying to set it up.
Yeah, for sure.
Finally here.
Hey man, you get the trolls going on Twitter and you slay them like one by one. So I'm giving you ammunition here. I'm just going to send you clips to just post out.
So that I can send to Ronaldo and
You see now. Bro, we're here to preview the State of the Nation address.
Yeah.
President Ramaphosa will give his State of the Nation address soon. And, I wanted to just sit back, kick it with you and talk through some of the issues from your perspective. I always enjoy your insights.
So I went over the 2018 SONA just to get a sense of how far is the president from what he envisioned himself, And you begin to notice a few themes in the, if you've just read all of the SONAs were a significant number. They always theme the year. This year is going to be the year of something or the other.
Yeah, the theme is always so long.
Yeah, and then they'll pick like a ANC struggle stalwart to reference for the year. Mandela is 30 years now since he got released from Robben Island. So maybe they'll go with that, the release of Mandela, 30 years, and the values, because, sometimes they try to move away from Mandela, but they always try to find a way to bring him in, bring him back in. But aside from the values, aside from the theme, you see from the 2018 address some critical themes that he was trying to address, where I think it's not going to work anymore, right? So when he came in, he could just say, we're going to have an investment conference. We're going to have an employment summit. We're going to have this talk shop and that talk shop. And then when we are now in the 2020 period, those kind of interventions are hollow to reference back to. So now you're not going to be able to come back and say, I'm going to talk some more. I'm going to have another meeting, because even if you look at one of the signature initiatives that they announced was the Youth Employment Service Initiative. And the initial numbers we were given is that it was going to create 3 million internships. Internships. It was going to create 3 million internships within the corporate sector in 3 years. That's 1 million a year. So now we're going to that deadline, because 2021 was the deadline. So by this particular moment, you're supposed to have 2 million of those. And then Stephen Kosef a bit later then says, listen, these goals that the president announced were unrealistic. We're not going to achieve them. If we get even a few 100,000, it's going to be a massive achievement. So coming into this particular SONA, the president is not going to have a lot of room to rhetoric. Because even in the last one, people said it's a wish list, it's nothing material or substantive. So for me now, what I'm looking for from these particular addresses is just how much of this stuff can you actually measure 1 year down the line. And when I put the fluff away, I don't find much from the president's SONAs. And in fact, I think a lot of people now are getting a little bit lethargic around Ramaphosa, because you remember the moment 2018 was a critical moment. He came in and there was that euphoria around, we've removed Zuma, it's a new dispensation, we got the businessman we've always wanted. Cyril was this guy that was being bandied around in the ANC as the mythological unicorn who could come in and fix everything. And now 2 years down the road, I think it's beginning to show that, listen, the challenges facing the country are deeper than one man. And this particular one man, he isn't a Kagame, he isn't a Magufuli, which is Tanzania and Rwanda's presidents, respectively. They are more action-oriented. They're willing to do the things, even if it means pushback from the public. But the challenge with Cyril is that, unlike Kagame and Magufuli, he doesn't really have control of the party. And that's where his challenge is.
So let me ask you on that, right? Let's try and put our heads in the Ramaphosa team's war room. He always seems to have a war room.
They love war rooms.
Let's go into the SONA war room, right? What does the president have to do in this SONA to stave off further criticism, or to ensure that the people watching it don't feel like it's just more of the same? Can he pull a rabbit out of a hat here?
Well, what I found challenging for Cyril Ramaphosa is just that all of his plans are fluffy. So even if you look at the NDP, when you read it with a critical eye, you begin to realize that, hang on, we don't have a lot of SMART goals here. There's nothing specific, measurable, time-based, even though, so what they do is that they'll say, we're going to do this kind of thing by 2030. We're going to do this kind of thing in 3 or 6 years. And those kind of far-out goals are really the bedrock of a Cyril Ramaphosa communication strategy. Give them something that sounds measurable but isn't quite measurable enough. I think if he deviates from that and actually focuses on 2 or 3 things where he can say, in between this state of the nation and the next state of the nation, I'm going to give you these periodic reports on this particular project. And no more summits, no more talk shops, but real, like, measurable action. I think that's going to be like a refreshing approach. But unfortunately, I don't think that Cyril is in a position to actually do that. I think that what he has committed himself to doing is to serving what corporate South Africa told him were the big issues. They told him, keep the inflation targeting, keep the monetary policy the same, and make sure that you fix Eskom and SAA and these other SOEs. And the approach that they believe in is that we need these equity partners, these privatized branches of these SOEs. And that's really what I think Cyril is pushing. So for everyone else, we're not going to really see much. The challenge now also is that Moody's is about to come back with their response in terms of, are they going to downgrade us further to junk status or not? And now he's not in a space where he has a lot of wiggle room.
Yeah. So let's then look at some of the broader politics behind, where this speech fits, because there's as always, there's a lot going on, and there's an interesting context into which the SONA falls. So let's look at the ANC quickly, because President Ramaphosa delivers this speech at an interesting time in the party. You've got this public protector stuff going on, where the parliamentary caucus seems to be divided, although the ANC has scrambled to try and, assuage doubts. How do you analyze what the ANC is thinking and what the major issues that confront the ANC are ahead of this SONA?
Well, I think the major issue confronting the ANC when we look at it is just that it seems very divided and factional and short-termist. So a lot of the people still seem to be pursuing, and I don't understand why this is a dominant thing, because the brand was tarnished during the Zuma era. Sure. Whether that's fair or unfair, it's a different discussion. The Zuma fans will say it wasn't 9 wasted years. Look at Cyril's 2 years. They were more wasted. But that aside, the brand was tarnished. The voter turnout for the ANC was lower. And the factional stuff has not gone away. So if you see the kind of rhetoric we saw from Supra, talking about how the public protector is doing an excellent job.
And he was very clear about it, eh?
Yes, he was very clear about it. We've seen Ace consistently undercut the president. I mean, there was the time when he was just refusing to acknowledge Cyril Ramaphosa as a president at all. So now he's modified his rhetoric, but still Ace can go offside quite quickly. But on the other side, you have Tito also going relatively offside in terms of speaking out of pocket, because he sometimes goes outside of ANC resolutions from Nazareth.
Anything can happen on Twitter with the former governor.
And but beyond that, he can even present an economic plan, which is diametrically opposed to the ANC economic plan. So the factionalism is an issue. The brand integrity is an issue. And right now, I think Richard Quest captured it best. Not to rephrase him or anything, but basically he was saying, we no longer buy into the South African narrative. And that's the challenge the ANC is facing. They have to reshape that narrative. And all of these fights, the public protector fight, the fights with Praveen and the public protector as well, all of these put a light on the ANC, which doesn't show it as a unified structure. Because even if you accept the Daily Maverick version, right, that the dark forces are fighting the president through the public protector, all that shows is that there are two forces within the ANC, and the House divided in the long term won't really make it out of this particular era. I mean, in the next 10 years, where's the ANC going to be in 2030 if they continue down this particular path?
I mean, I just think it's madness to accept this public protector fight, which is going to split the party down the middle, and Ramaphosa is going to have to deal with this hugely divisive issue at a time when he needs all the unity he can get. He's going to unite the faction opposing him.
Yes, he is doing that right now.
Exactly. And this public protector thing could go on for a year. Then there's the local government elections. It could be a poison chalice.
Yeah, and you know the thing is with the PP as well is that she's willing to have this fight. Whatever her motivations are, she's willing to drag it out, to fight every little step of the way. So if they make the rules, she goes to court to contest the rules. What does that do? It slows down the process a little bit. When they get to the parliamentary process, obviously there's a bit of a divided caucus there in terms of the ANC. So it could end up being the case that people vote on their conscience in this particular matter. But as all of this is happening, there are two different fights. I always tell people there's the fight in the formal court, right? The judicial system.
Sure.
And then there's the fight in the court of public opinion. And this is where I think Cyril and his camp are not realizing that they're losing the narrative. Because the narrative is you took $1 billion from the private sector. And having taken that $1 billion and won with that $1 billion, your backers are interested in privatization. Your backers are interested in this consolidation so that they stay in South Africa. But everyone else is not necessarily interested in that. And the agenda that is being pushed right now is such that the public protector exposed you. And because she exposed you, now she's got to go. And I don't think that even if they eventually win against the public protector, they'll be able to put that genie back in the bottle because it's everywhere. Every time you talk about this particular office, you hear both sides of that story. And for Cyril, he's not going to be able to, even after they remove her, because I don't think she'll ultimately win this fight, but even after they remove her, those speculations and scandals will remain. I think if you look at how once who was it? Was it Roger Stone? Roger Stone was the guy who started this gossip rumor about Obama is from Kenya. And once it was out there, it never went back into the bottle. You know, you can't bottle scandal. So this is where I think Cyril is in a precarious position because before we know it, we'll be at the next elective Congress. And then what? And then everyone who speaks in your favor will have the question being asked, but were you bought? Why are you so enthusiastic for this man? A man who opposed the Nasrec resolutions.
These sealed records, everyone is now coming out and saying, but what's the problem? Let's
Why
unseal the records.
Yeah, unseal.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. That's I think you must come back on just this one, because it's a whole thing. But for SONA as well, you know, in 2015 and around that period, we had these massive SONA crises where SONA stopped and police were sent into the house and the military was surrounding the
drama,
the precinct, you know, and now it seems like there's an intimation that we might get something similar. In a recent press conference, EFF leader Julius Malema said, if the president wants a peaceful SONA, then Minister Gordhan must be removed.
Yeah.
From the EFF perspective, how do you analyze this moment that they're in, and what would you be doing if you were them ahead of this SONA?
So, look, I think the EFF has made all of the moves that it can make, and this is classic EFF, right, to threaten to disrupt. They may or they may not, but I think the challenge with Pravin in this particular instance is that the public protector findings are still undergoing the review. Sure. So you may be preemptive to then say, listen, the public protector has a finding against you, therefore you must not be the minister. And so that's one. Number two is the issue that the public protector this time around has a cloud hanging over her, whether fairly or unfairly. Sure. So before with Thuli Madonsela, there wasn't any question mark about her. There weren't any adverse findings about her honesty or her agenda, or there weren't any adverse findings around the politicization of the office, and there wasn't a narrative around her as a person. This particular time, there is. So when you make a call for Pravin to be removed at this particular point in time, that call doesn't have the same weight that the calls for, you know, Jacob Zuma to pay back the money had at the time, because that particular public protector finding was a binding finding, and Zuma was trying to dodge by saying these are just recommendations, etc. And all of the court cases around it were not so much that the finding itself was legally flawed, etc., etc. More than they were that should Jacob Zuma actually respect the findings of the public protector. So that's a nuance there. However, when you look at the flip side, on the EFF side, right, they do bring a certain amount of excitement factor to the State of the Nation address, and they haven't really done anything disruptive in a while. They've been more calm. So it may be time for them to, go back and re-energize the debate around these particular figures, as they would say that, Pravin is a compromised character, that he's not doing a good job as well, and that the public protector findings against him actually have legitimacy. Look, I was also surprised that, the rogue unit stuff was dismissed by the National Director for Public Prosecutions, because I felt that it needed to be explored in a court of law. I felt that it was almost a different kind of political influence in this particular respect. So I do think they have a case when they say, listen, these particular organs are not being as tough on Cyril as they ought to be. And obviously there's a conflict of interest when the president appoints the director of public prosecutions. We've seen before, there was a ruling where I think Tony Yengeni was negotiating his sentence with the director of prosecutions in the presence of the Minister of Justice. And that was a whole scandal, and there's a court judgment about it. Can't remember top of my head. But it just showed that, listen, when you think about the real world as it operates, we like to pretend that there's perfect separation, but there's imperfect separation, and that's the reality. People don't make it to particular positions without having been vetted in more ways than the visible ways. And maybe this rogue unit decision is one of those. So I don't have a problem with the EFF using African method of filibuster to get their political point across, as much as I think that it's not going to necessarily ring in the same tone of truth and impact in this particular respect. I also think that, listen, the EFF is on a dangerous slope with the call for when they keep trying to meddle with the cabinet appointments. You know what I mean? Because people will then say, but you lost. I think it's okay to problematize, but sometimes when they say remove this guy or else, that sometimes goes a little bit too far. But that's the EFF approach, and everybody knows it's a baked-in cost at this particular point.
Yeah, I think you're right there. So I was watching the press conference, and what I thought the president of the EFF was going to say is, if the record is not unsealed, then there'll be problems, because that would have made a bit more sense to me. There's some public support for transparency. It makes sense. It's the president giving the SONA. It's him who must unseal the records. But when it was the Gordhan thing, it seemed, as you said, a little bit different to the pay back the money moment, where everyone was centered around the president. So it'll be interesting to see if they do go with an aggressive strategy that's centered around Minister Gordhan, if they can marshal enough public support to actually sustain a very risky political move. But
I don't think they care about the public support, because we must remember that also the EFF they're not pitching themselves right now to the middle. And I don't think they necessarily should, right? So I think with Zuma, some of the public support was borrowed because people just didn't like Zuma. So they were willing to look the other way when the EFF was being more disruptive. But I think the EFF is still, when you're at 10%, 10.6%, if we're using the national election results, you still have a long way to go before you need to pivot to the middle, if ever you want to pivot to the middle. So if they're still trying to communicate to the disenfranchised, the people who are frustrated, I think they still have a lot of runway, just to be disruptive and say, listen, we're unhappy with status quo, we're unhappy with the establishment, we are anti-establishment, we are for you, these guys are for Santon, we are for Alex and the other locales. I think that's a strategy that will still pay for them for a long time. I think the EFF could probably do this till 2024.
Okay, well, we'll have to make sure we get you in till 2024
to see whether they are pivoting.
Let's come to the DA, which is another piece of this equation. Steenhuisen is the interim leader. This is going to be his first big moment in Parliament. The cameras will pan to him. We don't know if he'll have to actually say anything. If there's disruption, he may actually have to play a role. And then you've got a DA leadership race going on in the background. How do you see this SONA fitting into the context of DA politics?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting to see what distinguishment or how Steenhuisen can differentiate himself on the day of the SONA, because as you're saying, he's in a very precarious position. He's being challenged and he's unpopular within certain factions of his own party, and definitely unpopular with social media and with a large demographic in South Africa, which view him as having attained the position basically through privileged connections. Maybe that's fair, maybe that's unfair. That's for the viewer to decide. But I do think that it's going to be difficult for him now, because the DA seems to be taking an approach where they want to give Ramaphosa minimal rebuttal. They view the enemies as being the dark side of the ANC and not necessarily the Ramaphosa regime. And this could be because they get funding from the same people who gave Cyril Ramaphosa money. So those funders obviously have an expectation around Cyril Ramaphosa and his particular cabinet, and they don't want him to be bothered. They want the attacks to go to DD, to go to ACE, to go to Supra. And maybe that will be the direction that the Democratic Alliance takes. But at some point, you cannot be an effective opposition unless you challenge the head of state, because you want to be the head of state, right? So if you're saying, I'm the future president, I'm the guy who's going to take South Africa to a position where we deal with the inequality, with the crime, with the poverty, with the unemployment. If you're that guy, then how are you better than this guy who's on podium? And it's going to be more than just, I speak better than him, because I think Steenhuisen is an effective communicator. Sure. The challenge is, what are you communicating? And because of the proximity that they seem to, they seem to think that if they just keep things stable, keep things the right flavor of white for the next few years, they'll at least be able to pivot away from the ANC 2023 thereabouts to contest and see if they can rally the voters back. But they view white South Africa as being sympathetic to Cyril Ramaphosa, and as such, they too must be sympathetic to Cyril Ramaphosa. But I don't know if that's not a different kind of mistake.
And it does seem to some extent that, you know, my money went for President Ramaphosa, and then something happened in the background and they've tempered this critique. They're not pushing this transparency envelope very far.
Which is what they used to care about before,
Yeah, and they've pivoted to the public protector. They obviously launched this attempt to remove her, which now seems to be gaining some momentum.
It's weird because, you know, the complaint was raised by Musi and Floyd, you know, so it's like the DA now hates the person who made their ruling, which they applied for. So now it's almost like your organizational consistency is quite, it's negligible, right? Because this was a thing you initiated and now you're not following it through. So it's going to be interesting. And the reason why I say that they're making a different kind of mistake, because they viewed Musi as trying to go too black. So that really chased away the white voters, right? Even though it may have retained the black voters. The thing is, one, they held him back. Remember when Musi talked about privilege and they were like, no, we don't want to talk about these kind of things. When he said, let's diversify the benches in parliament, there was always like pullback when he was saying, listen, this is a thing we can fix, which will help us later on and we can become more diverse and more representative. They pulled back when he tried to discipline was it Diane Barnard? Yeah, they pulled back. I think she's still an MP up to now. When he tried to discipline Zil, they also like massaged that process so that now she's back. But now I think that the mistake that they're making that's different is, if you are some version of a pro-ANC party and Cyril is still on the ticket, why should I vote for you when I can just vote for him? Because you're not going for him, he's still in charge, he's still pushing the same agenda, you agree with him. And that could make them vulnerable in the Western Cape. Because if Cyril is so good and his team is so good, why not give him a chance everywhere? Why not let him run everything? You know, so I think they may find themselves in a compromised position because the EFF is clearly against. So they're mopping up all of the anti-Cyril sentiment. And that also could weaken the ANC. But who exactly is the DA taking right now? So let's assume they get their voters back from the Freedom Front Plus, the 250,000 or whatever the number is. Then what? Then how do you get to 25%? How do you get to 30%? You know what I mean? Otherwise, if you were seen to be still weak on this particular issue, you could end up losing even more than the 250 that you lost.
Well, bro, I think we're going to leave it there. But thanks so much for
Always a pleasure.
the insights. Should be a lit SONA.
I think it will be.
I'll be following your Twitter feed to see as it unfolds what your views are. But thanks so much for joining SMWX.
Pleasure.
Like, share, subscribe, leave your comments below. You know, on this show, it's all about what you feel. We try not to thrust our views on you. And yeah, let me know what you thought. I think we need Mighti Jamie back, right? Like regularly, right?
I'll come back. I'll come back.
I see you even got the SMWX jacket
I
going.
had to do it. I had to do
okay,
it. I had
okay,
to stay
okay.
on brand. You know?
Thanks, bro. Thanks for watching. Ayeye. Thanks for watching the content. Like, share, and subscribe on all platforms. smwx.co.za to join the WhatsApp channel. And let's build a new conversation for a new generation. Ayeye.